Dame Kelly Holmes calls on the government to do more on mental health, plus Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, in her first exclusive interview since returning to the backbenches. Good evening. Violence against women and girls is an issue that has for a long time gripped our nation. After the murder of Sarah Everard, killed in London while she was walking home, many women came forward with their own experiences of harassment. More than 90% of women and girls asked said they had experienced some kind of harassment after dark, and hundreds of women are killed each year at the hands of men. It was a debate that at times has dominated Parliament over the last few years. Well, now the government is in turmoil too, with talks of mutiny behind the scenes and questions about the future of Liz Truss and her government. Earlier, I spoke to former Home Secretary Priti Patel in her first interview since returning to the backbench. Priti Patel, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. There's so much to talk to you about, but the reason that we're talking today is I've been doing some more work on the matter of violence against women and girls. It was something you cared about a lot as Home Secretary, and it's something that now you're not in office that maybe you can talk about a bit more freely, what was working, what wasn't working so well. And then I'll get on to daily politics a bit more, if I may, towards the end. But I wanted to kick this interview off with talking a bit about the scale of the problem. 72 women were killed by men in the year to March 2021 in domestic violence cases, 200,000 cases of sexual assault in the year to March 2022, which is probably the tip of the iceberg because many women and people will not report it, 70,000 cases of rape recorded. And in May this year, the ONS revealed 1 in 2 women and 1 in 6 men felt unsafe walking home in the dark in a quiet street near their home. Harassment, assault, rape, violence, even murder. How would you describe it? Is it a crisis? Is it an epidemic? How would you describe the problem that we are confronting?
So Beth, thank you for having me on, because these are really important and significant issues that I think as a society we have to tackle head on. We have to confront them and confront the behaviours and, you know, the causes behind them. Now, I think, first of all, it's important to say whether it's domestic abuse or violence against women and girls, it does not discriminate. It affects everyone, every gender, every race, people from all sorts of backgrounds. And that is why, certainly, from my time in government and as Home Secretary, and Boris Johnson as well as Prime Minister, you know, we were resolute in terms of our determination to tackle these issues and actually almost go backwards to go forwards, to bring forward the improvements that are required. So, for example, when I became Home Secretary, the domestic abuse bill was, you know, getting ready to go through Parliament. It was going through key stages, and we now have a Domestic Abuse Act, which has gone a long way, and this is important in terms of providing the support for domestic abuse victims, which, you know, predominantly involves women, but also, let's not forget, children are caught up in that as well. Providing the safeguards for them, ensuring that they are provided with homes, for example, working with local authorities, looking at some of the domestic homicide reviews that absolutely have to come with some of the most devastating crimes, such as deaths and murders. And then, of course, let's not forget, there's been a huge amount of work, and we can talk about this a lot more, around policing, the CPS, getting cases to court, the evidential collection of data and information, case progression, all these types of things were, in my view, quite frankly, substandard and inadequate. And, of course, that is what we've spent the last 3 years working on.
Earlier today, I went to interview Sarah Crewe, who's the national lead on this, who you know well and have worked well with. And I asked her about whether the problem was getting better or worse, and why, in terms of prosecutions of rape cases, why the country is so far off sort of levels in 2016.
At a period in my career, we were able to form a specialist team here in Avon and Somerset, and we started through a number of motivated individuals looking at the problem of sexual violence, we were starting to make progress on understanding, as practitioners, how to tackle it. For a variety of reasons, not least austerity, we had to make some choices in policing, and Avon in Somerset was no different from other forces, and that specialism had to retract slightly.
Now, you became Home Secretary, obviously, in 2019,
yes.
and Sarah there was talking about austerity that was probably in the first half of the term of Theresa May to Boris Johnson. But do you recognise that, Priti, that because of funding cuts, because of austerity, that police forces had no option but to scale
Beth,
back?
Absolutely, I'm the first to recognise that. I mean, I've worked with Sarah. I mean, she's a remarkable leader, by the way, in policing, and the work that she's doing in this particular area as a national champion is phenomenal, and we'll talk about aspects of that. But that is the reason why, as Home Secretary, I was assiduous in my determination. Number one, to back the police, but get them the resources that they needed to do their job, because they are one part of the criminal justice system. And I've always, even before becoming Home Secretary, but as a backbench member of Parliament, I've spoken about the end-to-end criminal justice system. You cannot have policing working in isolation of the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, or the courts, because if you're a victim of crime, you want to ensure that you're getting justice or access to justice, and perpetrators are being brought, you know, to heed, basically. So I've seen this in policing, and don't forget, I've worked with policing for over 3 years, not just on resourcing, but also on skills, capability, the tools, tasers, for example, but at the same time, changes to laws and legislation. And the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill was just one aspect of that as well, where, again, very specifically to violence against women and girls and domestic abuse, you know, perpetrators, the sentences that perpetrators would be receiving for serious violence assault would be increased.
So when you got into the Home Office, I don't want to dwell too much on it, but if you look at police funding, it had dropped by 16% less in real terms between 2009 to 10 to 2018-19 when you arrived. And then with the CPS, MOJ budget cuts 25% in real terms over that sort of period. So when you got in there, did you see that actually there is not enough funding, we need to get more resource in?
So it's twofold, Beth, it's twofold.
Number one... It's passed now,
Sure. Number one is the resourcing. I've always been, you know, I bang the drum on resourcing. But the second thing is I am very, very assiduous about public financing and funds. You know, this is how you integrate the system. You know, so the police working with the CPS, this is actually about how we integrate all aspects of our criminal justice system. So it's not just policing in one corner and the CPS in another corner, it's bringing the teams together, which all credit to Sarah Crewe in Avon and Somerset for this particular type of work on DA and violence against women and girls. And she's brought the system together, and that is why we're now seeing good, positive outcomes.
In terms of the violence against women and girls strategy, in December 2020, you've been Home Secretary for 18 months now. You opened a call for evidence to hear directly from the public on tackling violence against women and girls. Then 3 months later, in March 2021, Sarah Everard was abducted, we now know, by a serving police officer and murdered. And it triggered this wave of protest. And then you reopened the call for evidence. What happened then, and why did you do that?
So that was a shocking period, and I think, actually, the whole circumstances of Sarah Everard's disappearance, let's not forget, we had COVID. We were all in that COVID period. Our lives had fundamentally changed. It seemed unheard of that someone, a young girl, could go missing, you know, actually in front of us all. And I started to ask some really searching and probing questions around Sarah's disappearance, the time it's taken to get, you know, information, you know, all the basic questions around her entire disappearance, and it was just absolutely awful. And at that time, of course, you know, once we started to hear more about what had happened to Sarah, I think we should be really honest. I mean, the nation's hearts just sank. And we all felt broken in terms of what had happened to her, her disappearance, the killing, her murder, the atrocities that went with it, and actually her poor family, her poor family as well. And it just seemed right to me to reopen the consultation there was national outpouring. There was national grief and national outpouring and actually national, you know, just everything we saw at the time. But that reopening of the consultation, I think, did a couple of things. Number one, it just gave people who had probably never thought about letting their voices be heard in a public consultation or a government consultation, it encouraged them to come forward. And Beth, we had over 180,000 people reply and respond.
Did that surprise you or shock you or dismay? I mean...
It did and it didn't. I don't want to say it dismayed me. I looked at it as a chance, the opportunity...
dismayed you in the sense that it's so commonplace that women are saying we're being targeted or harassed on the street all the time.
I think, first of all, it gave them the confidence to come forward. That was the key thing. It dismayed me in the sense because it spoke about, if I may say so, sort of wider failure, state failure, you know, sort of institutions that, you know, perhaps, and we know, had not listened enough to those voices.
What do you mean?
So, for example, and we've heard this in rape cases before as well, not being victim-centric enough. You know, this whole culture of disbelief. And quite frankly, well, across not just the police, criminal justice system.
Right.
You know, when evidential cases were coming together, the rape review pointed this out very clearly. And the fact that women, I think, quite frankly, you know, rightly so, after what had happened to Sarah, felt that this could be a moment of change. And that, for me, was a really big rallying moment and I think became the catalyst for the changes that we've definitely seen since.
Were you dismayed by the Met's response at that time? You remember the vigil on Clapham
Common? Oh, absolutely.
The way that was policed. There was a moment where Cressida Dick's career was hanging by a thread.
I recall it all.
And you could have actually thrown her under the bus.
I recall it all, absolutely.
Well, there was a whole moment, I remember I was covering it, it was like, is Priti Patel going to call for Cressida Dick's to resign? Because if she does, she's gone. So
it was on a Saturday night, if you remember, the whole vigil and everything else. Yeah. And I brought in the inspectorate, the police inspectorate, to actually look at everything that had happened and ask some searching questions. And, of course, since then, Beth, let's be very, very honest, we've learnt so much more about the Metropolitan Police in terms of conduct, behaviours, attitudes, and, you know, there is now a new chief there, Mark Rowley, who is overseeing some fundamental reforms and a plan that he and I agreed part of his 100 days when he came in. But it was absolutely appalling. And also, I think this is important to recognise as well, you know, that lack of empathy and heart and understanding as to what women were feeling. And I think, again, it spoke of this whole them and us culture, policing, do we trust the police, would we engage with them? And, of course, those are the barriers that we've sought to break down since.
Do you think the way that the Met policed that sent a message to women that we don't sympathise with your experience and they were quite heartless about it?
Well, I think that was self-evident, Beth. I really do at the time.
And did you think about asking for Cressida Dick to
I was
step
onto
down?
her. Well, to be fair, it's not just Cressida, it was the leadership team of the Metropolitan Police.
Why didn't you?
Well,
thought it'd be more destabilising.
Well, quite frankly, there were live investigations taking place at the time anyway, and the most appropriate way was actually to call for the inspectorate to come in and ask some proper questions to actually make sure that, you know, the bar was risen, the standards, appropriate standards.
Do you think that was the beginning of the end for her as the Met chief?
I think it was a range of things, to be honest. It wasn't just the one incident. Appalling though it was a range of things that we went on to see in terms of standards, conduct, the culture, the whole culture of the Met, misogyny. And obviously that's been subject to plenty of reports. There's a new chief now that's obviously a new commissioner that's overseeing the change that's required.
And you do the consultation and you get all these hundreds of thousands of responses if you add in the ones from before as well. And as a result, you put 25 million to Safer Street funds, you have the 5 million Safety for Women Night Fund. Was it ever enough? Is it ever enough in terms of what you can do?
I think it's more than money, if I may say so. These funds are really important. Safer Street funds, I'm a big champion and advocate of that. Around the country, they're doing great things to give women confidence. This is the key thing, that they should be free and open to live their lives, go out in the evenings with their friends, etc. That's really, really important. And I think that must absolutely continue. I think the other point about this is it's the public awareness. I think we've changed attitudes, we've raised awareness. You know, we want to give people confidence that they can come forward, seek support. But I think importantly, Beth, you know, I say this as a mother, as a woman as well, we want to live our lives freely and openly, right? And not feel the threat of harassment.
Have you ever experienced, on a personal level, harassment or abuse? You have. Can you...
So as a politician, I've been a Member of Parliament for 12 years. Over the last 12 years, I've had consistent levels of, I think, harassment and abuse. So harassment is just intimidation, unkind things that obviously are said to me. I've had people try and follow me home, actually, as well. So all of that is unacceptable. The abuse, much of it is documented, some of it is documented, even in Parliament, you know, conduct of some MPs towards one another, and myself in particular, people saying that I have no right to speak out on certain issues because of the colour of my skin, because of my politics, for example. That's unacceptable. I've had a lot of death threats, cases have gone to court. That is all simply unacceptable.
Does it ever make you think, is it worth being in the public eye if I'm getting death threats and being abused like that?
It provides pause for thought, there's no doubt about that. But I came into politics, I believe in public service. I'm very old-fashioned in that sense, Beth. I do believe in public service.
In terms of violence against women, the rate review, the rate review in 2021 set targets to get charge levels back and prosecution levels back to rates seen in 2016-17. That's, in terms of prosecutions, just over 5,000 prosecutions a year. Do you think that target's in reach?
So I do. So I absolutely believe it is in reach. And actually, you've spoken to Avon and Somerset, you've seen the integrated work that's taken place, you've seen more cases go to court. But it's in reach for not just those reasons, it's in reach because of the support that's actually going in for women. So, you know, the independent sexual advisors, the IDVAs. For too long, we've seen a lot of attrition. You know, I used to spend a lot of time with victims of crime as a backbench MP, and you'd see people give up because of the processes, you know, long, drawn-out processes. Digital forensics, for example, being too intrusive, handing over your mobile phones. We've changed that. We have changed that, and that is really important. So it is within reach.
And Sarah Crewe was hopeful it was as well, but the funding cannot be taken away.
Of course not. Of course not. The other point to make as well...
And is that a message... I'm going to come on to Liz, but is that a message to the government as well?
So it absolutely
idea of
is.
cutting funding...
No. So, Beth, I think a couple of things here, basically. We have been very clear around Operation Satira, the work that Sarah Crewe and the team are doing. This is being rolled out to other police forces around the country. That has to happen. That absolutely has to happen. And in fact, it is happening. I know it's happening. But also, it's that integration across the criminal justice system, the CPS, the support that goes in from the grassroots, the community organisations, the IDVAs. You know, I met them when I last saw Sarah about 6 weeks ago. These are the ones that are making a positive impact, and they are the ones that will hold the hands of the victims and ensure that they are supported. That money cannot go, and the MOJ are absolutely supporting that, and it's important that we do that. You know, when you're in government, yes, there are plenty of choices, but at the end of the day, you know, we have to be on the side of the victims of crime, ensure that we're supporting them. We want to prevent crime as well, obviously, but we have to absolutely ensure that people are supported. Lives are devastated through these awful crimes, they really are.
Do you worry sometimes that some of the measures that your administration put in under Boris Johnson, because this is effectively a new administration, that they're undermining potentially some of the work? So not seeming... You're talking about being on the side of victims, but Robert Halfon was talking yesterday about not being on the side of working people. Do you worry about that a bit?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, this government, the new government as well, all of us were elected on the 2019 manifesto. And, you know, my time in government, you know, was literally focused on delivering on manifesto commitments. It's all about the people. All about the British people. You know, we care about the public. I always called them the people's priorities, as did Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. I believe in that. I absolutely believe in that. That's our duty. That's our responsibility. And, you know, I know my colleagues in government understand that.
You didn't run. Lots of people thought you might. You didn't run for leadership. Neither did you come out in support for either candidate. Was that because you didn't much like the look of either of them?
Well, I've always said that I was going to put literally party politics to one side because I had huge responsibilities as Home Secretary. For me, the national security and my constitutional role in government, and I don't want to recount what happened at the time. It was chaotic over the summer. I think the public saw that. I had a duty to carry on with my job. And Beth, you can't be Home Secretary and then come out and start joining political campaigns and things of that nature. You know, I've always taken my role seriously, and that was a position that I feel was right. I put the interests of the country before party politics.
You knew it might cost you a cabinet job, though.
That for me was not even a consideration. I had the privilege of serving as Home Secretary, and putting my country first was always my priority.
It's been pretty chaotic since the summer as well, I have to say. You said in your resignation letter you give Liz Truss your support from the backbenches. Is she making that hard for you at the moment?
Well, look, I've said this. She's the leader of our party. I was at conference last week, Beth, and I said this at conference as well. We do have to come together. We've got a clear vision and a clear mandate for the country. It's important that we rally behind that and just start delivering it.
Let me put it another way, and I won't keep pressing you, but a clear mandate for the country. Is she muddying the waters by introducing policies not agreed by Cabinet, not in the manifesto, and that has spooked the market, some of the tax measures, for example? Do you think that is muddying the waters?
Well, look,
look,
my message is very clear. We absolutely need to get back to delivering for the British public, and that is based on the 2019 manifesto. But at the same time, we've got to unite and deliver for the country. You know, the country is experiencing very, very hard and difficult times right now. That is self-evident. Yes, through actions of the government, and it is important that we put the public first. The winter is going to be hard. There's good work that's taken place, actually, on energy price caps. And, you know, all of those measures, I think it would be useful, actually, now to just make sure that we put the public interest first, deliver for the public, and make sure that we are giving them the support that they need through, Beth, what is clearly and self-evidently going to be some very challenging and difficult
And I'm going to
times.
ask you one thing, because other colleagues have said it, and it's the reversal of the idea of the corporation tax cut. Do you think that would be sensible now, given what's going on in the markets? If you want to put the country first,
sure,
you need a stable market.
There's an irony to this, Beth, which is market forces will probably dictate some of these changes now.
So you think they'll be bounced in?
I think some of this, you know, the market is going to dictate this, primarily because, you know, we want to see stability. Stability is absolutely crucial for everyone to carry on living their lives, for the institutions to function, but actually for the British people to have this, you know, the stability that they need in their lives as well. And by that as well, I mean mortgages, interest rates, all those crucial levers.
So you think that they should do it, or you just think they're going to be forced into it?
Well, look, those are discussions, obviously, that will take place, and I'm not going to preempt anything, but I genuinely think, from what we're seeing, the markets will probably dictate something.
OK, and my final question to you, you were Home Secretary for 3 years, incredibly busy, insanely busy job, and now you kind of have stopped, you're on the backbenches. What's next for you? Do you want to go back into government? Do you think you might seek a career? You had a successful career before this, or is your heart always going to be in politics?
Well, look, it was the greatest honour, it's the greatest privilege to be Home Secretary. There's no doubt about that. And toughest job in government as well, famously so. I'm a public servant.
Was it the toughest job?
Yeah, no doubt about that, no doubt about that. You know, you're responsible for national security. There are things that I know that many other people will never, ever know. And I was making life and death decisions on a daily basis alongside some of the issues that we've been speaking about, but even much wider than that. You know, look at the legislation that I've steered through Parliament, the changes that we made to migration.
It must be very weird
to
stop doing it.
Well, of course. But I am a public servant first and foremost. Yes, I had a career previously, but I chose to come into public service. And I do believe, it may be unfashionable to say that, I believe in serving my country. And that's what I hope to continue to do.
OK, Priti Patel, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you scan this QR code on screen now, you can watch that interview and all of our interviews online, plus all the previous episodes of the show, if you so desire. Well, stay with us, because coming up...
The greatest name now from the Olympic Games of this year, Kelly Holmes.
I'll never forget all the things that have happened to me, and I think that's kind of made me the athlete I am. I've kept fighting, and I'm just so never thought my dream would eventually come true, but I'm so glad that I never gave up on my dream.
The symptoms are many. They include things like excess facial hair, acne, problems losing weight, infertility, and not every woman has every symptom, and it's so common, yet many women don't know they have it and are living for years suffering in silence. You'll go to the doctor and explain what they are. He will take a blood test and then you'll have a scan of your ovaries, and it's a syndrome, so you need to have at least 2 symptoms to be diagnosed with PCOS. Initially, I found out I had it when I was 19 years old, and I've been living with the symptoms for around 4 years before I was finally diagnosed. And when I went to the doctors, there was really no clarity around what PCOS was. She only told me that I'd find it difficult to have children, and that was what happened. But later on in life, I ended up having 6 miscarriages over a period of 5 years. Yeah. One of the symptoms of PCOS is poor egg quality. So I assumed that that was the reason why, and because there was no education at school around what it was, I assumed it was that, and there was no information or any help during that time to get me through and find out what it was. Well, eventually I found a recurrent miscarriage specialist who helped me have my children. He put me on a course of treatment that was good for women with PCOS and a course of other medication as well, and I eventually did have my 2 children. The problem is that women go for years undiagnosed, and usually it's madness. 1 in 10 girls will end up diagnosed with PCOS, yet the first time many women hear about it is when they're sat in their doctor's office. And during that time, they're dealing with the mental and physical anguish of the symptoms and not knowing what it is. Yeah, I set up a government petition, which is we need to get 100,000 signatures to for the government to consider debating the petition in Parliament and hopefully change policy and get PCOS on the national curriculum.
Dame Kelly Holmes is a British Olympics legend, winning gold in both the 800 and 1500 metres at the 2004 Olympics in Athens. Before her rise to athletics fame, she had a career in the army. Now she's calling on the government to recognise the importance of physical and mental health. She talked to me earlier about her own experiences of mental health when the pressure meant she wanted to end her own life. Dame Kelly, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, you are a national face. I think everyone pretty much in the country knows who you are. You're one of our most celebrated Olympians. You were the first Briton in over 80 years, nearly a century, to win the double, the 800 and the 1500 at the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens. You're pretty much an amazing person. I want to go back, if we can, to your childhood and how it all began. When did you realise that you had this talent?
So it was definitely at school. Now, I wasn't academic at school, so the thing that made me engage with it was sport. And I remember my PE teacher kind of taking me to the side and saying, right, you have two options. You can be no one, or you can focus on what you're really good at, and that is running. But you've got to believe in yourself, and I've always kind of kept that in my mind over my career. And she sent me off for a cross-country race, and I really did not want to do it. I mean, everyone's memories of cross-country at school was wet, wind, mud, you know, kind of like I had an afro hair, Airtex seafood shirt, you know, kind of the high-knee socks. I didn't want to do it at all, but I came second against a girl who everyone knew was really good at our age, and it gave me that fire in my belly that I hated losing. And suddenly I was like engaged, that was it. Sport was my thing.
So you joined the athletic club when you were 12, and then you went on to the English school's 1500 metres. This is 1983. You were 13 years old. It was your second season and you won it.
Yeah, so it was my first track season, and it was 1500 metres. I suppose I wasn't really scared at that time, because when you're only just starting anything, it's kind of like you've got nothing else to worry about other than trying to race. And I remember winning this race, standing on the rostrum and thinking, wow, this is like amazing. And then I kept that going throughout my school career, going to English schools. Didn't win again until I was 17. I think because I was inspired by sport, by watching Olympic Games when I was 14 years old.
But your story is so fascinating as well, because then you leave school at 16, you then go and work in a sweet shop, and you work as a carer, and then you join the army. So you are obviously this prestigious talent. It's quite clear you are exceptionally gifted. But then you stop doing it. What happened, Kelly? Why did that happen?
So I was inspired at age 14 to become Olympic champion after watching Sebastian Coe win the 1500 metres at the Los Angeles Olympic Games, and also to be in the army. And I think the army gave me a sense again of purpose. It gave me a driver and a feeling that I could do something for myself. So I tried to get into the army over when I was 15, 16, 17. They couldn't let you in till you were 17 and 9 months. That season I won my last English schools championship as well, and I also became mini youth Olympic champion and won a gold medal for my country. But I wanted a career, I really did. I was inspired by what I saw, you know, soldiers screaming and shouting at other soldiers going under the scramble net and over the 12-foot wall, and I was like, that is it, that's my life.
What I want to do.
So I ended up trying to join.
4 years later, you watch the Olympics again, and then you go back to training. So what happened? I just find this story so fascinating, because it's so not linear,
Yeah.
but you end up at the apex of your career. So 22, you go back to athletics.
Yeah, so I'm watching the Olympic Games again now in my barrack room, which is a room with your bed, and, you know, that's where you live. And I saw this young girl who used to race against me from Kent, and she was in this Olympic Games. She was in the 3,000 metres, and I just looked there thinking, I mean, I know her, like Liz York, like she's at the Olympic Games. And it just reignited the fire that I'd had in my belly when I watched it when I was 14 years old. And I don't know, there was something that came into my head that that's what I want to do. I really want to be Olympic champion. So I was already competing for the army, but I was sort of reluctantly doing it because I loved being a soldier. Suddenly I find myself at a World Championships for Great Britain. You know, and the story is actually a bit more fascinating, because every year as an elite sports person you have a national trials, and that national trials is to get you selection for that Games, Commonwealth, Europeans, World or Olympics. So you have to get generally in the first two and a selection time. So I rock up to this national trials in '93, being announced as Corporal Holmes as I was at the time. No one knew who I was, apart from people that knew me as a junior. And somebody said to me, you just got to chase these two girls. They're going for the world qualifying time. So I chased them, beat them, and got the qualifying time. There I was, finding myself in this team. So I clearly had a bit of, like, competitiveness that I've always had in my life.
You know, you look back on your 18-year-old self that didn't believe you could be an Olympian. Was there part of you that thought, I don't I don't know if I can make it, and I'd rather do this because I think I can succeed, and I don't know about that.
I think sport wasn't a career opportunity really for you then, you know what I mean? Like it is now, you know, and even during my career, it's very amateur, you know, to actually finance your career in sport is relying on being one of the world's best and potentially sponsorship. So at the time, it wasn't really a career.
And now you're doing both. You're training and you're still in the army. And then at 27, I mean, at 27, you go full time. And then what happens? I mean, you go on in your 30s to win a double.
I know.
It's actually a bit nuts, isn't it? That's not the way round you're meant to do it, is it?
It really is. And people talk to me, and the funny thing is when I won 2 gold medals in Athens, of course, those that didn't know my career just suddenly think I'm winning 2 gold medals out of nowhere. Well, I was an international athlete for 12 years. I'd won 11 international medals at all of the top world class. I was between number 1 and 3 in the world for many, many years. But of course, the Olympics are the pinnacle. So most people watch the Olympics. Now, that was my 3rd Olympic Games. My first one I actually did while serving full-time in the military. Used to use my leave to go away and compete. I get a bronze. So I'm 30 years old, and people are like, well, you must be retiring now.
This is the thing. You're meant to be retiring, and at 34, you win this double. Did you kind of, in your mind going into that Games, did you sort of think it's now or never, this is my last shot at this?
I think at 34, I thought the realistic thing was that would probably be my last Games. But probably what people forget is, like, middle distance running and women generally were peaking at 30s anyway, late 20s, early 30s, and having come back into my sport as a senior athlete relatively late, sort of at 23 realistically, because I missed that gap between junior and senior. I kind of had that in the bag. Plus I was a really strong female, having served in the military physically and mentally, I suppose, in one way. So yeah, just winning, you know, there's a long story, and the highs and lows were huge. You know, I had many injuries which affected both my mental and physical health. But the one thing I had, and the one thing that kept me going, is I believed I could do it.
You know, you are a national figure, you are properly famous, hugely successful, but there was an underbelly to all of this, wasn't there? You've been struggling with injury, and you were having some mental health issues, and you were self-harming, which you then talked about. Can you tell me what was going on underneath this outward success?
So, I mean, there's two areas. The one that was key and what was very public was the fact that when you're trying to reach an elite standard, it's kind of not normal, you know what I mean? You're pushing your body and your mental capacity to the absolute limit, which maybe people don't always understand. You know, it became my life. It became everything that I ever thought of. And because it was who I believed I was at the time, that was me, it was my identity to be a sports person, every crush or blow was an injury or illness. You know, I went through stress fractures, ruptured calves, torn Achilles, glandular fever, tonsillitis, damaged femoral nerve in my back, and mental health problems 7 years out of my 12 years as an international athlete. And I got to a point when I was 33 years old, which was a year before the Olympic Games, getting ready for a World Championships, where I had a huge breakdown because the pressure, expectation on myself to be good. One, because I was battling with other things in my life, but two, because I really wanted to be an Olympic champion. And I got to a point where I didn't want to be here, quite frankly, but I did. You know, you have a battle in your head when half of you wants to live and half of you doesn't.
What do you mean? So you felt suicidal at times?
Yeah,
then?
absolutely, because, you know, you push yourself to an extreme, and my identity at the time was purely about sport, because I didn't feel I had one as Kelly Holmes. I had one as the athlete Kelly Holmes. And so I lived on thriving to succeed. So when I basically became a self-harmer in a training camp in France because I didn't have an outlet. We didn't really talk about mental health. If you think about 2003, was there much talk about mental health?
No.
Openly? No. So So I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know what a breakdown meant. All I know is that I was screaming inside, and to release that pain was to hurt myself. It wasn't obviously the best thing I could have done. I could have probably spoken to someone, but I didn't know, because you get fearful of opening up.
Do you mean that in terms of your career, that because Kelly Holmes, because your identity was elite athlete, if your body was injured, you would feel, what's the point of Kelly Holmes? If I can't run and win, then what's the point of... That's how you felt?
Yeah.
That's really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I really did. And it was hard because all I had in my mindset was this Olympic Games. Because I never, not just that one Olympic Games, but being a world-class Olympian and having an absolute... I don't know where it come from, but I always believed I would be Olympic champion.
And so the prospect of that not succeeding
yeah,
was something you couldn't even forgive yourself for, even though some of the injury problems are out of your control, right?
They're out of your control, but I also think that in hindsight it made me who I am. You know, now post it, I believe in fate. You know, before it was just hell. But post it, I think, well, I was meant to go through this journey, you know, I was meant to fight to earn it. Because I didn't think I'd win 2 gold medals. I mean, who wakes up and thinks, yeah, I can be a double Olympic champion? You know, it's not something I dreamed of. But I did it.
Because I remember watching you, like the nation watched you, and then for you to achieve that, but then be open about what was really going on, that they can be outwardly successful, but they're battling issues that aren't being discussed. It's actually quite brave. Was it hard to talk about it, or was it cathartic?
So I didn't speak about it to anyone until I retired in 2005 and I was writing my first autobiography. The reason being because I actually never knew how to talk about it. So when people say to me, well, how did you get off of being the low of the low and win 2 gold medals? The reason why is because I opened up a lot more to my team around me about needing help and support, but not about the mental health side, because I still didn't know how to do that.
Right.
But what I did is bring on board and say, look, I know I can do this if I stay injury-free. Because actually being the lowest low, I couldn't go any lower with what I'd gone through over my career. So in a way, that empowered me to go, if I can still win medals. So in my head, it drove me to success. So I brought people around me, like you would in any area of life. I brought people who believed in me, people that could keep me healthy and injury-free, keep me motivated. I was still self-harming, but there were moments when it was reminding myself of what I'm going through, what I've gone through. It was like always a cry for help, but it was lessened because when I wasn't getting injured, I felt better.
So you knew about your sexuality, you said, when you were 18, but you kept that hidden for over 3 decades. You kept that as a secret. Why did you keep that hidden for so long?
Yeah, I mean, it is a long story, but it's, I suppose the significance of it is that health became an issue in terms of how you feel about yourself. So during COVID, we all coped with things very differently, didn't we? You know, I actually became a bit of a gym bunny. I was doing everything because I was at home, you know, and going out running, using the time that we had to do it. Yeah, I got COVID. And because I am someone that likes to keep active, keep fit, and then I'm laying out for 3 weeks, it drove me insane. And it was almost then the start of me thinking about just how I feel about myself. It really kind of had an impact, and it just made me realise that, you know, life can be so short for so many people. And I just thought to myself, do you know what? I want to start living my authentic life. I want to be me. And so I decided that I needed to, at some stage, talk about the authentic me, which is being a gay woman, in public. I mean, I've always been it to my friends and family.
So your friends and family knew?
Yeah,
it was
always
just...
known, yeah. So it was that public thing that I had to keep secret, and a lot of it was to do with my time in the army. But it had an effect on my mental health hugely, because I thought, I don't want to die with my friends and family saying, what, isn't it a shame that she just can't be herself? So the impacts on my mental health were huge through my whole career. But of course, I was able to hide the talk of mental health through my sporting career. So sport has actually been my saviour through lots of different reasons.
When I read about you coming out, you said you called your brigadier, basically your superior in the army, to ask about that. Now, lots of people will go, why on earth would Kelly feel the need to do that?
Well, put it in a very short way, there was a ban in the military that stopped people homosexuality, and that ban only got lifted in 2000. I served during that ban, and also there was no talk about sexuality in sport either, in international sport. You wouldn't really talk about homosexuality in sport or in the military. So for me, I had these overarching fears inbred in my life for so long that fear is debilitating. You can't just suddenly let go of fear. And the only way I felt that I could change that was to know there'd be no repercussions if I publicly said that I was a gay woman from the army, even though I have a complex relationship with the army because I'm an honorary colonel.
You're groundbreaking because you were hugely successful as an Olympian, but you talked about mental health. And you were groundbreaking because you were successful in the army and a successful sportsman, and you talked openly about sexuality. So two things that you battled with, then you spoke about that help other people, no doubt, to open up. I wanted to ask you about this, about whether things are changing. You know, the Prince and Princess of Wales were on Radio 1 this week on Newsbeat talking to younger people about World Health Day and about how people need toolboxes to talk about mental health. Do you think that things are getting better, that people are able to talk about there isn't such a stigma?
I do think we're getting there. I do think it all comes with anything about visibility, transparency, and seeing people talking and having that platform where it's safe to talk. I think people who are in the public eye who start talking in that realm, it makes other people that have either watched you or been inspired by you think, oh, okay, it happens to anybody. So I do think there's a power in people who are very public talking. To help those that feel isolated or feel that there's no way they could ever do it in their life. I do think there's a power to that. So I do think it's changing. I think it changes, but there's more that needs to happen.
And you were talking about the pandemic and your own mental health, and you know, lots of people. I think I read 2 million people are suffering from long COVID. Obviously, there were huge challenges of the lockdowns and isolation. A big impact on the nation's mental health, and now we've got a cost of living crisis. Yeah. Do you think that we are, or do you worry that things are going to get worse because of the sort of two huge and quite external events that have kind of knocked, both sort of nationally knocked us all, but just individuals struggling with the fallout of COVID, struggling with current sort of anxiety over how to make ends meet?
Absolutely. So I've been working with Nuffield Health, who have produced a sort of index, basically, and done some research on the impact of mental and physical well-being. And it shows that 1 in 3 people mental health has absolutely got worse over the last 12 months.
That's a lot, isn't it?
That's having a huge impact on society generally. I mean, if you think, you mentioned around the cost of living, around the access to support, you know, people are suffering. Young and old are suffering. And I do think that the government as a whole have to take some action to recognise that physical and mental health go side by side. So when you're talking about impacts on society generally, people who are not taking up the jobs, and there's plenty of jobs out there, you know, why is this happening? You know, why is people's mental health deteriorating? They have to look at this to put, well, we're trying to fight for a 10-year strategy, you know, a 10-year kind of a proposal so that the government actually put out, like, let's say, a legislation to say that they both are as important as each other. because I've seen it. So they're saying that the government guidelines, or the health guidelines, is 150 minutes of moderate activity per week. Moderate activity is just a brisk walk. Nationwide, the average is 65 minutes per week. That means just over 10 minutes a day, we might be briskly walking. That's it. So why are we getting more obese? Why is our mental health getting really bad? Why is there a huge issue with teenage mental health and suicide? Because we're not looking at the importance of being active and how that correlates with up here.
So you would like, number one, you think that the government should have a proper 10-year strategy about trying to improve the nation's health.
Yeah.
And that needs to be linked to trying to encourage people to be more active, because we know the link between physical activity and improved mental health.
We'd like the government to publish a 10-year strategy where it combines the importance of mental and physical health, well-being, being on par with each other. Because we know that there is a really big correlation between both. They are so important. So I talk about, in a way, the negative side of me pushing to be an elite athlete and the pressures it had on my mental health. But I now have to do and be active for my mental health. I have to get out and do something, whether that's in the gym, whether that is just a walk to breathe, to take the stresses and pressures that I might feel, whether that is calling a mate and saying, do you fancy going out, you know, for a run? Do you fancy doing even an online workout, core workout with me these days? I have to do that just to feel good.
Do you think then at the moment the government are letting people down on mental health? You do?
I do, because we're not recognising the importance of them going side by side.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's a huge... If you look at the impact of mental health and how the stats have risen to those that are suffering, and then the costs on the NHS because they're having to combat people's mental health problems, why aren't we realising that they go side by side?
Your message would be, if you could sort of see, you know, if the Health Secretary's watching this and she could make one change now, what sort of thing would it be, Kelly? Would it be more provision for sport in schools? Would it be more free access to gyms for the public? What sort of practical things would you say, please, can you introduce this?
I think firstly, to recognise and publish a joint strategy for mental and physical health, so that money and, you know, whatever money goes to people's health, it recognises that it's for mental and the physical side, whatever that might be. I think that when we're looking at it, the cost of living is huge. So if we're talking about people, let's say, eating healthier, if the cost of our shopping, let's say, is getting so far out there, what are people going to do? Get the quick fix, cheap products. Most of those aren't that healthy, you know, because all the healthy things seem to be expensive. So why don't we look at just that, cost of living in terms of our health generally? Definitely the provision for people to access more facilities, to do more sport. If you're from a disadvantaged area of deprivation, you don't have the means, you don't have the access, yet your health is actually worse off because of that. Of course, schools need to prioritise the need for it to become a priority that kids do more PE and activity in school time. They're neglecting this. They're putting it on to coaches, putting it on to parents to facilitate it out of school. What does mental health do? When you feel... So I can say, when I do something active, and I know this, I feel good, like I'm more alert, I'm kind of ready to go, I feel good in myself. Same with young people. You know, you need to get them moving, make them feel better about themselves. They'll be more attentive in school.
Just in terms of your journey with mental health and sport, we saw some examples of that with very, very successful female athletes over the past year. There was Simone Biles, the amazing gymnast who had to pull out of some of the competition in the Tokyo Olympics. We had the tennis star Naomi Osaka pulling out from the French Open over mental health issues. Presumably, one, you could resonate with how they're feeling.
Yeah.
And two, do you think it's progress that they're able to do that rather than keeping it hidden in the way? Because both of them were quite criticised in different ways, weren't they?
I think it's brilliant that these young people in sport are having the confidence and ability to talk about the effects that they're having as young people through their mental health problems. Regardless of the fact that they're world-class athletes, they're human beings first and foremost. And I think we have to look at that. You know, people need support, people need access to talk, but they need a safe environment. So you need to be able to open up and express it. I do think that when you get people coming out who are young and talking about the impacts, as long as there's backed up by their support mechanisms, there's a huge amount of charities out there, I must say that. Anyone that is suffering and listening to our conversation, there's so many charities out there that can support you through this journey, because most of it's about conversation. Once you have conversation, you open up, you get that support. It could be a huge relief.
Dame Kelly Holmes, thank you for spending some time. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you scan that QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to the Beth Rigby Interviews podcast. A new episode's available each week. And I take a look at the highlights of my interviews, and there's some extra bits and pieces in there too. That's on the Sky News app or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, that's all for today's show. Thank you so much to our guests, Dame Kelly Holmes and Priti Patel. And thank you for watching. Hope to see you next week.